I'll create this narrative following all your specifications. Let me begin the 11,000-word script. They called me the corpse counter. Not official designation, understand, just what the other orderlies muttered when they thought I couldn't hear. 17 years I'd served in the Mortuary Division beneath Precinct Arbitrator Complex, 17 on Valerion Hive, preparing the executed for final processing, maintaining records of every body that passed through our pneumatic chutes from the judgment chambers. 3 levels above. I took pride in that precision. The ledgers never lied under my care. Every entry matched name, crime, method of execution, time of death, disposal authorization. My supervisor, Proctor Hadrian, said my meticulous documentation honored the Emperor's justice. I believed him. I believed all of it with the fervor of the faithful. My name is Corvin Thale, Registry Orderly 2nd Class, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what I learned. I was not a victim who stumbled into horror. I was complicit in it for nearly 2 decades before I ever recognized what I'd become. The Mortuary Division occupied sub-level 43, deep enough that you felt the hive's weight pressing down through recycled air that tasted of chemical preservatives and burnt ozone. Our shift began each morning at the 14th hour, announced by a brass bell that rang 3 times, its tone flat and final, like a closing coffin lid. We wore gray robes, not the crimson of the arbits above, but something neutral, something that wouldn't show stains. The work was simple, mechanical, wholly in its repetition. Bodies arrived via pneumatic chute from Judgment Chamber 7, already processed through the Emperor's justice. My task was reception, documentation, preparation for final disposal in the hive's reclamation furnaces. Each corpse received a brass tag stamped with their case number, cross-referenced against the execution warrant in our archives. The paperwork had to be perfect. The administratum audited us quarterly, and discrepancies meant penance servitude. I never had discrepancies. The temperature in the mortuary was maintained at precisely 8 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to slow decomposition during processing, cold enough that we worked with stiff fingers and visible breath. The walls were gray rockcrete. The floor slightly sloped toward drainage grates that never quite stopped smelling of whatever chemicals we used to wash away the evidence of death. 13 tables arranged in rows, each with its own brass tag dispenser and documentation slate. Above them, the pneumatic chutes. 7 of them, metal maws that opened with hydraulic hisses to deposit their cargo. The sound became so familiar, I could identify which chamber a body came from by the pitch of the chute's mechanism. Chamber 7 had a slight squeal, bearing worn but not worth replacing. That was the sound of justice delivered, 30 times daily on average, each one logged, verified, honored through proper documentation. I lived in Hab, Block 72. 12 levels up from the mortuary, a small room with a sleeping pallet, a shrine to the Emperor carved into the eastern wall, and a single window that looked out onto the hive's interior industrial sector. I rose at the 11th hour each day, performed my devotions, recited the litany of righteous labor, ate a protein bar and drank recaf, then descended to my work. My life had structure, purpose, meaning in service to the IMPERIUM's eternal order. The executed were heretics, criminals, deviants who threatened humanity's survival. My work ensured they passed from this world with proper accounting. That their crimes were remembered, that justice was recorded for eternity. I took pride in being the final witness to the Emperor's judgment. The wrongness began small, almost invisible, the kind of detail you dismiss because acknowledging it means questioning everything. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were inventory days, when we cross-referenced our weekly logs against the Arbit's sentencing records. I was reviewing case file 7741 beta, a woman named Marisa Kelvin, executed 3 days prior for sedition and possession of forbidden literature. The execution warrant was standard charges listed. Evidence summary, sentencing authority signature, method authorized. But when I pulled the associated investigation file from our archives to verify documentation completeness, something caught my attention. The evidence summary in the investigation report listed the recovered texts as questionable but inconclusive. Recommend monitoring rather than immediate action, threat assessment minimal. The report was dated 4 months before her execution. Someone had reviewed the case and decided she wasn't dangerous enough to warrant death. I stared at those words for almost 5 minutes, reading them again and again, searching for the explanation I knew must exist. Perhaps additional evidence emerged later. Perhaps the initial assessment was wrong and subsequent investigation revealed greater threat. I checked the file for supplemental reports, addendums, follow-up investigations. Nothing. The case file ended with that initial report recommending monitoring. Then 3.5 months of nothing. Then an execution warrant dated 2 weeks later with no stated justification for the escalation. In the section marked, New Evidence, someone had written by hand not applicable. She had been executed for possessing texts that the investigating arbiter judged non-threatening. Why? I told myself there must be classified information I lacked clearance to access. The arbits operated on levels of secrecy I couldn't comprehend. Perhaps she'd done something else, something sealed in augmented files. Perhaps the investigator missed something and higher authority corrected the mistake. That had to be it. The alternative, that she'd been executed despite being investigated and found mostly harmless, was impossible. The IMPERIUM didn't execute the innocent. That was heretical thinking, doubt poison that could corrupt if entertained. I logged the discrepancy in my personal notes, marked it for potential inquiry if I ever had appropriate opportunity to ask Proctor Hadrian, and continued my work. The doubt whispered, but I pushed it down, buried it beneath prayers and routine. 2 weeks later, another case caught my attention, and this time I couldn't dismiss it so easily. Case file 8129 Gamma, a manufacturing worker named Jessen Vrath, executed for suspected mutation and heretical physical corruption. Standard charges for someone working near radiation or unstable materials. But when I referenced the genetic screening report attached to his investigation file, the results showed negative for mutation, negative for corruption, baseline human within acceptable parameters. The medical examiner's notes explicitly stated, no evidence of physical or genetic deviation detected. Subject cleared for continued employment. That report was dated 6 weeks before his execution. 6 weeks. He'd been tested, cleared, then executed anyway. I sat at my documentation desk, the brass tag for Jessen Vrath still in my hand, feeling my heartbeat accelerate in a way that frightened me. This wasn't vague evidence or ambiguous language. This was explicit contradiction. Medical science said he was clean. The IMPERIUM executed him for mutation he probably didn't have. I checked the warrant 3 times, searching for the explanation. In the justification field, someone had written, subject cleared by genetic screening, but productivity metrics below acceptable standards. Replacement cost, effective per Administratum Directive 993. They'd killed him because he worked too slowly. They'd used a false charge of mutation because it was easier than processing him through normal labor reassignment. My hands started shaking. I set the brass tag down carefully, precisely, in perfect alignment with the edge of the desk, because if I could control that one small thing, maybe I could control the panic spreading through my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. The IMPERIUM was harsh but just. the Emperor protected. We punished the guilty, purged the corrupt, maintained order through righteous violence. We didn't execute innocent people for failing productivity quotas. That would make us no different from the horrors we fought against. That would mean I'd spent 17 years preparing the bodies of people who died for administrative convenience. I should have reported it immediately. Should have taken the file to Proctor Hadrian, demanded explanation, trusted the system to correct this obvious error. But I didn't. Something kept me silent, some instinct I couldn't name. Instead, I began searching, quietly, during inventory days when I had legitimate access to archives. I started pulling case files at random, cross-referencing execution warrants against investigation reports, looking for the pattern I desperately hoped wouldn't exist. It took 3 months. 3 months of secret investigation during my authorized work, never accessing anything I wasn't supposed to see, just reading more carefully what I'd been reading perfunctorily for 17 years. 97 cases reviewed. 41 showed clear evidence of guilt with investigations supporting execution. 23 were ambiguous, evidence suggesting but not conclusively proving guilt. 33 showed investigation reports explicitly recommending against execution, or medical screening clearing the accused, or evidence summaries stating insufficient proof, or inconclusive, or threat level minimal. 33 people executed despite their own investigation files saying they shouldn't be. The numbers made me sick. Literally physically ill, bent over drainage grate in the mortuary, retching until nothing came up but bile and terror. 33 out of 97. 1 in 3. If that ratio held across the precinct's 3 years of operation, across the average 30 executions daily, the math became obscene. I tried not to calculate it. Failed. Approximately 337,000 executions since the precinct opened. 1/3 of those potentially unjustified. Over 100,000 people. 100,000 souls sent through pneumatic chutes into my preparation tables, tagged, logged, incinerated, their deaths recorded in ledgers I'd maintained with pride because I thought I was serving justice. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours. My devotions became desperate, frantic prayers begging the Emperor to show me I was wrong, that I'd misunderstood, that there was explanation and purpose and righteousness I was too limited to comprehend. The litany of righteous labor stuck in my throat. How could I call my work righteous when it involved processing innocent dead? How could I take pride in perfect documentation of imperfect justice? I kept working because stopping meant confronting what that meant. I kept logging, tagging, preparing bodies, maintaining the machine I was beginning to understand I'd always been part of. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, in the 9th month of my secret investigation. The pneumatic chute from Judgment Chamber 7 opened with its characteristic squeal, deposited a body on table 4. Female, approximately 40 standard years, execution method listed as electrocution. I retrieved the brass tag, began the documentation process, pulled up her case file. Name, Celia Harkin. Charge possession of prohibited literature and seditious ideation. I scanned through the warrant, saw the standard language, began cross-referencing with investigation report. Then, I saw the list of recovered materials, and my entire world stopped moving. The prohibited literature was a children's picture book, a story about a girl who planted seeds and grew a garden. The investigation report included scanned pages, simple illustrations, basic vocabulary, the kind of thing you'd read to a child at bedtime. In the investigator's notes, material appears to be pre-imperial children's literature, recovered from subjects dwelling during routine compliance sweep. Content promotes themes of individual agency and self-sufficiency outside administratum oversight. Classification. Ideologically questionable but not actively heretical. Recommend confiscation and citizen monitoring. Subject cooperative, remorseful. No indication of intentional sedition. She'd owned a children's book. A book about gardening. Someone had decided that was sufficient reason to execute her. I stood there holding her brass tag, staring at her face on the documentation slate. She had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners from decades of smiling. Someone's mother, perhaps, someone's friend. Someone who'd kept a children's book from before the IMPERIUM standardized all permitted literature, probably because it reminded her of her own childhood, or her mother's voice, or some small connection to beauty in a hive where beauty was scarce. I prepared her body, tagged her, documented her with the same precision I'd always used. Then I walked to the pneumatic disposal chute, the one that fed the reclamation furnaces, and I couldn't pull the activation lever. My hand wouldn't move. For 17 years I'd sent thousands of bodies through that chute, honored their passage with perfect paperwork. Now I stood there frozen, understanding fully for the first time that I wasn't just documenting death. I was participating in murder. Systematic, bureaucratic, sanctified murder that wore justice like a mask. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes or hours, time lost meaning. Eventually Proctor Hadrian found me, still holding Celia Harkin's documentation slate, staring at the disposal chute. He looked at me with something like recognition, the way you look at someone experiencing something you've experienced before. "Thale," he said quietly. "Come to my office." I followed because I'd always followed orders. Proctor Hadrian's office was on level 42, one level above the mortuary, a small room lined with filing cabinets and lit by flickering lumen strips. He sat behind his desk, gestured for me to sit across from him. He looked old suddenly, ancient in a way I'd never noticed. His hands trembled slightly as he poured 2 glasses of amasec, something I'd never seen him drink during duty hours. He slid one across the desk toward me. "You've been accessing investigation files," he said. Not a question. A statement. Cross-referencing execution warrants against evidence reports. Proctor Martin in Archives mentioned you've been thorough in your inventory reviews. I said nothing. Couldn't find words. "How many cases have you reviewed?" Hadrian asked. 97, I whispered. "And how many concerned you?" 30. 3 had investigation reports recommending against execution or clearing the accused. Hadrian nodded slowly, took a drink, set his glass down with careful precision. 1 in 3. That ratio holds fairly consistent across the entire precinct. Sometimes 1 in 4, sometimes 2 in 5. Depends on the quotas. "Quotas." The word hit me like physical impact. "Quotas," I repeated. "You've been an exemplary orderly for 17 years, Thale. Meticulous, faithful, never questioned your work. That's why I approved your position. That's why I've always ensured you received commendations. Because the Mortuary Division requires people who can maintain precise documentation without excessive thought about what they're documenting." He paused, closed his eyes briefly. But that kind of person eventually sees too much. Eventually the patterns become impossible to ignore. I've seen it dozens of times. Good people, faithful people, who suddenly realize what they've been part of. I saw it in my predecessor. I see it in you now. Why? The question came out broken, desperate. If they're innocent, if the investigations clear them, why execute them? Hadrian picked up his glass, stared into the amber liquid like it held answers. The IMPERIUM spans 1,000,000 worlds. Thale. Uncountable trillions of humans, every one of them a potential vector for corruption, heresy, sedition, alien infiltration, demonic possession. The actual threats are real, numerous, existential. But investigating every suspected threat thoroughly, properly, with full evidence gathering and fair trial, would require resources the Imperium doesn't have. So we make calculations. We establish quotas. We ensure populations remain frightened enough, controlled enough, that they police themselves. He looked at me then, and I saw something terrible in his eyes. Not madness, not evil. Exhaustion. Decades of exhaustion. Precinct Arbitrator Complex 17 is required to maintain monthly execution rates within specific parameters established by Segmentum Command. Too few executions and populations become complacent, begin to question authority, drift toward independence. Too many, and you trigger resource loss, economic disruption, potential rebellion. The quotas are carefully calculated to maximize control while minimizing waste. When genuine heretics and criminals don't fill the quotas, we supplement. We review investigation files for convenient targets. People who won't be missed. People with questionable evidence, but not enough to prosecute properly. People who failed productivity metrics. People who owned the wrong book. I felt something breaking inside me. Fundamental structures of faith collapsing like rockcrete under seismic pressure. That's not justice, I said. That's murder. Yes, Hadrian said simply. It is. And it's also survival. Do you understand what happens if we don't maintain those quotas? If we show mercy, if we only execute the proven guilty? Fear diminishes. Compliance erodes. Within a generation, maybe two, the hive destabilizes. Crime increases. Heresy spreads. The Inquisition intervenes with measures that make our quotas look merciful. They purge entire hab blocks, entire districts. They sterilize populations. They virus, bomb cities. We execute hundreds to prevent the deaths of millions. That's rationalization, I said, hearing my voice crack. That's just philosophy justifying atrocity. Perhaps. Hadrian's hands shook as he refilled his glass. I've questioned it for 40 years, Thale. Every day, every execution I authorize, I lie awake seeing their faces, the ones I know were innocent. I pray for forgiveness I don't deserve. But I also remember Valerion Hive before the quotas were established when I was young arbiter. I remember the riots, the heretical cults that spread through 700 hab blocks before we could contain them. The demonic incursion that killed 3 million before the Inquisition quarantined the affected sectors and burned them clean. The quotas started after that. Regular executions. Visible, public, arbitrary enough that everyone understands they could be next. Fear is policy, and you know what? It works. The hive is stable. Has been for 5 decades. No major uprisings. No demonic incursions. No sector-wide purges. Just our little mortuary, our quotas, our 30 dead daily instead of millions periodically. He finished his drink, met my eyes with something between apology and defiance. I don't know if I'm right, Thale. I've never known. But someone has to be willing to bear this burden. Someone has to maintain the machine that keeps humanity alive. Would you prefer it be someone who enjoys it? Someone who doesn't question, doesn't doubt, doesn't see the people they execute. I thought I was better. I thought my horror meant something. But maybe I've just been another cog, another processor, telling myself my guilt made me righteous while I signed the warrants anyway. Celia hearken, I said. The woman today. She had a children's book about gardening. Hadrian pulled up his documentation slate, scrolled through recent files, found her case. Read it. Closed his eyes. I authorized that warrant 3 days ago. Read the charges, saw prohibited literature, signed the approval. Didn't read the investigation details. Never do anymore. Can't, or I'd never sign anything. He opened his eyes, looked at me with something like challenge. What would you do, Thale, if it was your responsibility? If you believed, truly believed, that executing innocents prevented greater slaughter? Would you refuse and risk the consequences? Would you resign and let someone crueler take your place? Would you maintain the system while hating yourself for it? Tell me, because I don't know the answer. I had no answer. Sat there silent, broken, understanding that I'd just been offered the same rationalization he'd accepted, the same justification that would let me return to work tomorrow, log the bodies, tag them, maintain perfect documentation while knowing what it meant. The same trap he'd lived in for 40 years. There's a document. Hadrian continued, his voice hollow now. Classified to Arbit's proctor level and above. Called Administrative Necessity Doctrine. Written by some administratum philosophers and inquisitorial theologians centuries ago. It argues that humanity's survival requires systematic violence against itself. That populations allowed to live without existential fear drift toward chaos. That regular purges of innocence, visible and public and arbitrary, maintain behavioral compliance that prevents systemic collapse. The document has imperial seal approval. It's official policy. This isn't corruption, Thale. This isn't failure or deviation from imperial ideals. This is the ideals. This is how the machine works. We're the ones who never understood what we served. He pulled another file from his desk, slid it across to me. Valerion Hive population, 5 decades of records. Look at the stability metrics, crime rates, heresy incidents, economic output, death rate from violence, disease, infrastructure failure, everything. Now look at what happened in hives without quota systems. The comparison is stark. We're monsters, Thale. But we're monsters who keep millions alive. That's what I tell myself when I can't sleep. That's what I'll tell myself tonight when I close my eyes and see Celia Harkin reading her gardening book to some child who'll never know why she died. I looked at the data. He was right. The numbers didn't lie. Valerion Hive, with its quota system, was stable. Crime low, production high, population maintained. Comparable hives without quotas showed periodic explosive violence, inquisitorial intervention, massive death tolls. The system worked. It was monstrous, and it worked. That was somehow worse than if it had just been cruelty for cruelty's sake. I thought about my sister then. Haven't thought about Lyra in years. Pushed the memory down because remembering hurt too much. She'd been executed 7 years ago, when I was 10 years into my service, before I started questioning. Possession of seditious materials, the charge said. She'd been a teacher in the upper Hab blocks, loved books, collected old texts. I'd processed her body myself, tagged her, logged her, sent her through the disposal chute with perfect documentation. Honored her death by ensuring the paperwork was flawless. Now I understood she'd probably died to fill a quota. Probably owned something ideologically questionable. Some old text that meant nothing but served as convenient justification. I'd been proud of my precision that day. Proud that I could serve the Emperor's justice, even for my own sister. Proved my faith was stronger than family, and she'd died for nothing except mathematics. I started crying. Couldn't help it. Sat there across from Proctor Hadrian while 17 years of faithful service collapsed into ash and understanding. He didn't try to comfort me. Just sat there, old man with shaking hands, watching me experience what he'd experienced decades ago. You have a choice now, he said finally. Same choice I had. Same choice everyone who sees behind the mask has. You can accept what you've learned, rationalize it, tell yourself the smaller horror prevents the larger one, and continue your work. Maintain the system because someone has to, and it might as well be someone who understands the cost. Or you can refuse. Resign. Walk away. Report this to higher authority, though they already know and approved it. Make some futile gesture of defiance that changes nothing but lets you sleep at night. Or the third option, the one that scares me most because I've come close so many times. You can make yourself a problem. Speak publicly. Try to expose this. become the very threat the quotas exist to suppress. And then you'll end up on my desk, another case file, another warrant I'll sign while hating myself. What did you do, I asked, when you learned? I accepted it, Hadrian said. I told myself I'd be better than my predecessor, more careful, more selective. Only sign warrants for people who genuinely done something wrong, or at least questionable. I lasted 3 months before I realized that selective mercy was just another form of cruelty. Who was I to decide which innocent person deserved to die? What made one life worth sparing over another? So I signed everything that crossed my desk, became the processor I despised, and I've spent 40 years telling myself it was necessary. He stood, moved to the window that looked down into the mortuary, where Celia Harkin's body still lay on table 4. I'm tired, Thale. So tired. I used to think my exhaustion meant something. Meant I was still human, still capable of horror at what I did. Now I think it's just cowardice. Too afraid to refuse. Too afraid to accept. Just tired. I left his office without answering his question. Returned to the mortuary. Finished processing Celia Harkin, gave her the perfect documentation she deserved even though it meant nothing. Went home. Stared at the shrine to the emperor carved into my wall, the shrine I'd prayed at every morning for 17 years, and felt nothing, no faith, no certainty, just void. I spent 6 days like that, going through motions, processing bodies, maintaining documentation, living in numb horror while my mind tried to reconcile what I'd believed with what I knew. The Imperium was monstrous. The Imperium was necessary. Both were true. That paradox lived in my chest like shrapnel I couldn't remove. On the 7th day, I made my choice. There was a data, port in the mortuary, secured, but I'd always had access for documentation purposes. I'd never abused that access, never even considered it. 17 years of trusted service meant my credentials had high clearance. I used that clearance now. Downloaded every case file I'd reviewed. Every investigation report showing innocence paired with execution warrant. Every medical screening clearing someone for mutation they were executed for anyway. Every piece of evidence documenting the system's true nature. Compiled it all into a single file. Added my testimony, my documentation, my 17 years of perfect records showing exactly what I'd helped perpetrate. I sent it to every Vox station I could access, every administratum office, every Arbits complex in the subsector, every imperial institution my credentials let me reach. Told them what Valerion Hive was doing. Told them about the quotas. Told them about the administrative necessity doctrine. Gave them names, numbers, evidence. Made it impossible to ignore. Then I went to Proctor Hadrian's office. He looked at me and knew immediately what I'd done. Something flickered in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or envy. You made your choice, he said.
Yes.
It won't change anything. They'll suppress it. Call you corrupted, possibly heretical. Everything you sent will be classified and buried. The system will continue because the system works. I know, I said. But I couldn't be part of it anymore. Couldn't maintain the machine while telling myself my horror made me righteous. Maybe you're right. Maybe the quotas prevent worse violence. Maybe I'm destroying something necessary. But I'd rather die believing I tried to stop murder than live knowing I facilitated it. Hadrian nodded slowly, picked up his Vox unit, didn't call for Arbites immediately, just held it, staring at nothing. I envy you, he said finally. I've wanted to do what you did for 40 years. Never had the courage. Told myself staying was noble, maintaining the system while hating it. But maybe I was just a coward. He activated the Vox. This is Proctor Hadrian. I need Arbites at my office immediately. Suspected sedition and unauthorized data access. They came quickly. 6 Arbites in full armor. Shock malls ready. They took me without violence. I didn't resist. As they led me out, Hadrian looked at me one last time. "I'll authorize your warrant," he said. His voice was hollow. "I'll sign it like I've signed thousands. And I'll hate myself for it, but I'll sign it." "I know," I said. They kept me in holding cell 47 for 3 days. No torture, no interrogation, just waiting. On the 3rd day, they brought me to Judgment Chamber 7. The one whose pneumatic chute had that characteristic squeal I'd learned to recognize. The chamber was empty except for the executioner, a hooded figure I'd never seen, but whose work I'd processed for years. The judge wasn't present. Didn't need to be. My guilt was established the moment I'd sent that data. The executioner looked at me with what might have been sadness. Or maybe I imagined that. People see what they need to see in the face of death. "Any final words?" he asked. Protocol required offering that. "I am Corvin Thale," I said. "Registry Orderly 2nd Class, Mortuary Division. Precinct Arbitrator Complex 17. For 17 years I processed the executed with perfect documentation. I believed I served justice. I was wrong. I participated in systematic murder. I enabled atrocity through precision. Everything I've said is true. Everything I sent was evidence. I die now as penance and protest. May those who find this record do better than I did. May they refuse the rationalization I accepted for too long. May they choose conscience over complicity, even knowing the cost." The executioner activated the mechanism. I heard the chair's power cell charge, felt the restraints lock. Then electricity, burning through me, stopping my heart, ending everything with the same efficiency I'd always prided myself on. I am dead now. Have been dead for 3 weeks. Though you're reading this sometime later, if you're reading it at all, they processed my body through the mortuary I'd served for 17 years. Someone else tagged me, logged me, maintained perfect documentation. Someone else sent me through the disposal chute with proper protocol. The machine continues. It always continues. But I made a choice. In the end, when I understood what I'd served, when the rationalization was offered and the path of least resistance was clear, I chose refusal. Chose to make myself the problem the system exists to suppress. Maybe that changed nothing. Probably it changed nothing. The quotas continue. The administrative necessity doctrine remains policy. Good people like Hadrian sign warrants while hating themselves, telling themselves it's necessary, maintaining the machine, because someone has to. But I couldn't. When I understood that justice was a mask over murder, that my perfect documentation honored nothing except efficiency, that my 17 years of service meant 17 years of complicity in systematic execution of innocence to fill quotas designed to maintain control through fear, I had to refuse, had to try. Had to make some gesture, however futile, that said no. This is wrong. I will not continue. I will die rather than be part of it. They called me the corpse counter. They were right. I counted corpses for 17 years, tagged them, logged them, processed them with pride and precision. I honored their deaths by ensuring the documentation was perfect. I served the machine faithfully until I understood what the machine was. Then I stopped. That's all. That's my testimony. That's my choice. I stopped serving and died for it, and maybe, someone reading this will understand why that mattered even though it changed nothing. The IMPERIUM survives through calculated atrocity, through quotas of innocent dead, through systematic murder wearing justice like a mask. That's the truth behind the prayers and the devotions and the faithful service. That's what we serve. Knowing that, can you still serve it? Should you? Must you? I couldn't answer those questions in a way that let me sleep. So I chose refusal, chose death, chose conscience over survival. Was I right? I don't know. I've never known. But I made my choice, and I stand by it even in death. My name was Corvin Thale. I served as Registry Orderly second class in Valerion Hive's Mortuary Division for 17 years. I was complicit in systematic murder. I died trying to expose it. The system continues. But I do not. That has to mean something. It has to. If you're reading this, you're someone who found my testimony. Someone who has clearance, access, authority. Someone inside the machine. You face the same choice I faced. You can rationalize. You can accept. You can tell yourself the smaller horror prevents the larger one. You can maintain the system because someone has to. Or you can refuse. Can make yourself the problem. Can choose conscience over complicity, even knowing the cost. I can't tell you what's right. I'm dead. My choice is made. But I'll tell you this. Living with the weight of what you know is its own kind of death. Sending warrants while hating yourself doesn't make you better than those who enjoy it. Maintaining the machine while telling yourself your horror means something doesn't absolve you. The choice is impossible. Both options are terrible, but one lets you keep who you are, and one transforms you into what the system requires. Choose carefully. Choose knowing the cost. But for the love of whatever humanity remains in you, choose consciously. They called me the corpse counter. I counted bodies until I understood what those bodies meant. Then I stopped counting and became counted instead. The machine continues. The quotas continue. The administrative necessity doctrine remains policy. Good people maintain monstrous systems while hating themselves for it. And the IMPERIUM survives. That's all. That's everything. I have no wisdom to offer except this, knowing what your part of matters. Choosing consciously matters. Refusing when you cannot continue matters, even if it changes nothing except who you are when you die. I died as myself. Whatever I'd become, however complicit I'd been, at the end I refused to continue. That has to be worth something. It has to. My name was Corvin Thale. I am dead now. I have been dead for 3 weeks. The machine I served for 17 years processed me with perfect efficiency. Someone else maintained the documentation. Someone else honored my death through precise paperwork. The system continues. But I do not. And maybe, just maybe, that difference matters to someone. To you, to whoever finds this and faces the same impossible choice. May you do better than I did. May you choose sooner. May you refuse more courageously. But most of all, may you choose consciously, knowing what you're choosing, accepting the cost. That's all anyone can do. That's all I did. It wasn't enough. It was everything I had. The emperor protects, they say. But who protects from the emperor's servants? Who guards against the guardians? Who questions justice when justice itself is suspect? These are the questions that killed me. These are the questions you must answer. There is no right answer. There is only the answer you can live with or die with. I chose death. I chose conscience. I chose refusal. Make your own choice, but make it knowing what it means. I am Corvin Thale. I was the corpse counter. I served the machine until I understood what the machine was. Then I stopped. That's all. That's everything. May it be enough. May someone remember. May someone choose differently. May something change because I refused. But if nothing changes, if the machine continues untouched by my sacrifice, then at least I died as myself. At least I chose. At least I tried. That has to be worth something. It has to.